The Weird Tales of Kurt Singer. Greetings, dear listeners. Recently, I was showing my friend John, who works at the digital media studio of the local library, some thumbnail images of some old weird paperbacks from my personal collection. John, who collects books on UFOs and other outre subjects, was especially intrigued by a thumbnail showing the Satanic Omnibus. The Satanic Omnibus, edited by Kurt Singer, a book I read over Christmas. In fact, he was so intrigued that he looked the book up on the net and found that a copy with an identical cover sold for $500. Needless to say, I won't be buying my own copy when I can get it free from the library. Now, as those who follow this channel know, I celebrate Christmas by reading and listening to Cthulhu Mythos stories. Cthulhu Mythos. We have a Cthulhu Christmas. This year I read 4 weird tale collections edited by the prolific writer Kurt Singer, an anti-Nazi activist and former spy who wrote or edited over 100 books on horror, crime, espionage, and even a bio of comedian Danny Kaye. He also wrote biographies of LBJ and Ernest Hemingway, and a book about that erotic spy, Mata Hari. Woohoo! So today I'd like to present a short show and tell review of the 4 books I read for your amusement and edification. Let's begin with the aforementioned Satanic Omnibus, which was released in 1973. It contains stories by Lovecraft, The Shunned House, Seabury Quinn, Claire de Lune, featuring the psychic detective Jules de Grandin, Thorpe McCluskey, and Robert Bloch. Now, The Shunned House is one of my least favorite Lovecraft stories. I find the antiquarian backstory too slow, and I've always had a hard time visualizing the entity that haunts the Shunned House. I tried listening to an audio recording of the story to further my understanding, only to fall asleep. My favorite story in this collection was The Devils of Po Sung by someone called Bassett Morgan. It's a South Sea Island tale of black magic, carnivorous orchids, talking alligators, and orangutans. And it's great fun. I enjoyed it immensely. I later found out that Bassett Morgan was actually a lady named Grace Ethel Jones from Chatham, Ontario, a town my parents lived in shortly after they were married. Now, I should state here that most of the stories in the 4 collections are pulp horror stories from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Just the kind of yarns I love. But if you're not a pulp fan, you might find these stories thin gruel indeed. Thin gruel. Next up, Kurt Singer's Ghost Omnibus, originally published in 1965. It features 2 stories by Robert Bloch, 2 stories by August Derleth, 2 Jules de Grandin stories by Seabury Quinn, Lords of the Ghostlands and Cat's Paws, plus stories by Allison V. Harding, Paul Ernst, and Thorpe McCluskey. My favorite story in this collection is Robert Bloch's The Shadow from the Steeple, which appeared in the September 1950 edition of Weird Tales. It's a reply or sequel to one of my favorite Lovecraft stories, The Haunter of the Dark, which was itself a reply to Bloch's The Shambler from the Stars, which appeared in the September 1935 edition of Weird Tales, when the author was only 18. The three stories in what is known as the Robert Blake trilogy, and no, we're not talking about the actor that played Beretta here, the bad boy, not that Robert Blake. The three stories in what is known as the Robert Blake trilogy are The Shambler from the Stars, The Haunter of the Dark, and The Shadow from the Steeple. All are well worth a read or a listen. Next we have Weird Tales of the Supernatural, released in 1966, which is aptly named as it contains stories from a host of Weird Tales alumni. 2 from Robert Bloch, 2 from Edmund Hamilton, plus stories from Eric Frank Russell, Isaac Asimov, Frank Belknap Long, Robert Barber Johnson, Greya Laspina, and Seabury Quinn. For once, not a de Grandin story, but a very moving ghost story. And Give Us Yesterday, reminiscent of that old classic ghost tale, The Monkey's Paw. Perhaps the most interesting yarn is The Vengeance of Nitocris, a tale of revenge based on an actual event that took place in ancient Egypt and written by the famous playwright Tennessee Williams, author of A Streetcar Named Desire and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, among other classics. What is particularly noteworthy about this story is that it was Williams' first published work, his first published work, written when he was just 16. As an aside, I once appeared in a production of Streetcar. I played Steve, Stanley Kowalski's landlord. If you've never seen Streetcar, be sure to check out the movie version with Marlon Brando. The last of the 4 Kurt Singer books is Ghouls and Ghosts. I keep wanting to say Ghosts and Ghouls, but it's Ghouls and Ghosts from 1972. While it does feature 3 stories by Seabury Quinn and Weird Tales by Robert Bloch and Edmund Hamilton, this volume contains more of what I would describe as classic ghost stories. Among them are The Screaming Skull by F. Marion Crawford, a version of which I have presented here on this channel. The Horla by de Maupassant, A Terribly Strange Bed by Wilkie Collins, The Judge's House by Bram Dracula Stoker, and, finally, The Ghost Ship by Richard Middleton. I have presented an adaptation of another of Middleton's ghost stories on the Brighton Road on this channel. So, there you have it. 4 collections of rickety weird tales from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. While many of these stories are perhaps too slow, too tame, or too pulpy for more modern tastes, they're just the sort of yarns I like to wallow in during Cthulhu Christmas. Would you be interested in more quick and dirty reviews of the occult books in my private library? If so, please let me know in the comments. I hope to present some short videos featuring some of my books real soon. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,500 subs. Till midnight. Cheers.